They thought she was just another confused traveler trying to sneak into a luxury lounge. But within the next hour, the entire airport would regret the way they treated Claire Bennett. The polished marble floors of Terminal 1 reflected the glow of towering digital billboards as thousands of travelers moved through Reagan International Airport that rainy Thursday afternoon. Business executives rolled sleek carry-ons toward priority gates, while flight attendants hurried past in navy uniforms and polished heels. Near the entrance to the exclusive Sapphire Sky Lounge, a woman in a gray cardigan quietly adjusted the strap of her worn leather tote bag and checked the boarding pass on her phone for the third time. Claire Bennett looked nothing like the wealthy passengers surrounding her. Her blonde hair was tied into a loose ponytail, and her white sneakers showed faint signs of wear from years of volunteer trips and long airport walks. At 36, she carried herself with calm dignity, but years of living simply had taught her how invisible people could become once they decided you did not belong. She stepped carefully toward the private lounge entrance as thunder rumbled faintly outside the massive glass windows overlooking the runway. Behind the front desk, Vanessa Cole barely looked up at first. Dressed in a fitted navy blazer with a gold airport badge pinned neatly against her collar, she had spent nearly 8 years managing premium clients and difficult travelers. One quick glance at Claire's clothes was enough for her expression to tighten with immediate judgment. "Can I help you?" Vanessa asked flatly. Claire offered a polite smile and handed over her digital boarding pass. "Hi, yes, ma'am. I believe I have access to the Sapphire Lounge before my flight to Chicago." Vanessa scanned the screen for less than 2 seconds before raising an eyebrow. "This access level is reserved for executive priority members." Her tone sharpened slightly as two businessmen standing nearby exchanged subtle smirks. Claire remained calm. "I understand. I was told my account already includes lounge access." Vanessa crossed her arms slowly. "Ma'am, people can't just walk in here because they feel entitled to premium treatment." The words landed harder than Claire expected. Around them, the sound of rolling luggage seemed to fade beneath the growing tension. Several nearby travelers had already begun watching. Claire lowered her eyes briefly, tightening her grip around the strap of her bag. She had spent years helping children from struggling families travel across the country for education programs, yet somehow, moments like this still stung. Vanessa leaned slightly forward, her polished smile colder now. "I'm going to need you to step aside, while I assist actual priority passengers." And just like that, the room began turning against the quiet woman, standing alone beneath the bright airport lights. Claire stepped quietly away from the front desk as another wave of travelers moved past her toward the glowing entrance of the Sapphire Sky Lounge. The automatic glass doors opened every few seconds, releasing soft jazz music and the scent of fresh espresso into the crowded terminal, before sealing shut again behind passengers carrying designer luggage and polished confidence. Vanessa had already shifted her attention to a man in an expensive charcoal suit, greeting him with the warm smile she had denied Claire only moments earlier. "Welcome back, Mr. Holloway," she said brightly. "Your private suite is ready." Claire lowered herself into a seat near the window across from the lounge entrance, setting her tote bag carefully beside her feet. Outside, rain streaked across the enormous terminal windows, while baggage crews guided aircraft beneath blinking runway lights. She glanced down at her phone as a new message appeared from Ethan. "Landing in 30 minutes. Did everything go smoothly?" Claire stared at the message for a moment before typing back slowly. "Just airport delays. Nothing serious." Then she locked the screen and slipped the phone back into her pocket. She had promised herself years ago that she would never use Ethan's name to force respect from people who should have shown basic kindness in the first place. Across the terminal, a young woman holding a phone whispered excitedly to her friend while glancing toward Claire. "I think that is the woman from the lounge," she murmured. Apparently, she tried getting into executive access without clearance. Her friend smirked and lifted her phone slightly, as if preparing to record. Claire pretended not to notice. The humiliation sat quietly in her chest, heavier than she wanted to admit. Nearby, a television mounted above Gate 14 played a financial news segment discussing the rapid expansion of Bennett Aviation Holdings. The scrolling headline beneath the anchor mentioned a surprise airport inspection involving one of the company's largest investors arriving later that afternoon. Several airline employees passing through the terminal immediately straightened at the announcement. A supervisor hurried toward the customer service desk while speaking urgently into her headset. "All department managers need to stay alert," she said. "Corporate executives are already on site." Vanessa overheard the conversation and instantly adjusted her blazer, smoothing the front with nervous precision. The atmosphere inside the terminal subtly shifted. Staff members suddenly moved faster. Smiles became sharper, postures straighter. Yet, through all the rising tension, nobody paid attention to the quiet woman sitting alone beneath the storm-dark windows, reading over a thick folder filled with aviation grant proposals and airport accessibility reports. Claire calmly turned another page while thunder rolled softly outside. She did not look angry. She did not look embarrassed anymore. If anything, her steady silence unsettled the terminal, far more than outrage ever could. The tension inside Terminal 1 continued building, like pressure beneath the storm clouds outside. Airline employees moved with forced urgency now, whispering into radios and straightening display signs that had probably gone untouched for months. Near the Sapphire Sky Lounge entrance, Vanessa Cole refreshed her makeup in the reflection of a polished metal column before checking her phone again. So, corporate executives were already inside the airport. Nobody knew exactly which investor was arriving, only that the visit carried enough importance to send senior management into quiet panic. Claire Bennett remained seated near Gate 14, calmly reviewing paperwork spread across her lap. The thick folder contained detailed proposals for expanding wheelchair accessibility, programs in smaller regional airports, a project she had personally funded through the Bennett Foundation for nearly 4 years. Most people walking past her would never have guessed the quiet woman in the gray cardigan had spent millions helping families travel safely across the country. A sharp burst of laughter suddenly broke the tension nearby. The young influencer from earlier had uploaded a short video clip of Claire being turned away from the lounge. Several travelers were already watching it on their phones. "This is why they need stricter security in first-class areas," one man muttered while shaking his head. Another passenger smirked. "People always try to get access they did not pay for." Claire heard every word. Her fingers paused briefly against the edge of the folder before she quietly closed it. Across the terminal, Vanessa noticed the growing attention and walked confidently toward Claire, with another airport supervisor trailing behind her. The clicking of her heels echoed sharply against the marble floor. Several nearby travelers immediately fell silent, sensing another confrontation approach. Vanessa stopped directly in front of Claire and crossed her arms. "Ma'am, I thought I made myself clear earlier." Claire looked up slowly. "I am waiting for my flight." "Actually," Vanessa replied coldly, "we have received complaints from passengers about you lingering near the premium boarding area." The accusation caused a few people nearby to glance over again. Claire blinked in disbelief. "Complaints?" Vanessa nodded toward the general seating section farther down the terminal. Coach passengers should remain near their assigned gates, unless invited elsewhere. The words hung in the air like ice. Even the supervisor beside Vanessa looked uncomfortable now. Claire rose slowly to her feet, holding her tote bag close against her side. Her calm expression never cracked, but the humiliation behind her eyes had become impossible to miss. For a brief moment, the airport seemed to freeze around her. Then a sudden voice echoed through the terminal speakers. Attention all department managers. Mr. Ethan Bennett has officially arrived on airport property. The reaction was immediate. Vanessa's face lost color. Around the terminal, employees straightened instantly while nervous whispers spread like electricity through the crowd. Claire said nothing. She simply looked toward the far end of the terminal as black SUVs slowly appeared beyond the rain-covered glass outside. Rain hammered softly against the massive terminal windows as the line of black SUVs rolled across the private airport access road outside. The flashing security lights reflected against the wet pavement, while airport personnel rushed into position near the executive entrance. Inside Terminal 1, conversations lowered into nervous murmurs. Employees who had ignored protocols all morning suddenly adjusted ties, fixed name badges, and forced polished smiles onto anxious faces. Vanessa Cole stood frozen for half a second before immediately turning toward the nearby supervisor. "Get the hospitality team down here now," she whispered sharply, "and somebody find out which gate Mr. Bennett is heading toward." The supervisor hurried away without a word. Claire Bennett remained standing beside the row of terminal seats, one hand resting calmly on the strap of her tote bag. The television screens above the gates now displayed breaking business headlines about Bennett Aviation Holdings expanding partnerships across major United States airports. Travelers around the terminal glanced repeatedly between the screen and the growing executive activity near the entrance. Yet somehow nobody connected the quiet woman in the gray cardigan to the powerful name spreading through the airport. Vanessa forced a nervous laugh and looked back toward Claire. "Looks like today is becoming very important for all of us." Claire said nothing. Her silence unsettled Vanessa more than anger would have. Before another word could be exchanged, a group of airport executives appeared from the far corridor near the security checkpoint. Expensive dress shoes clicked rapidly across the marble floor as senior managers moved together in tense formation. At the center walked Richard Holloway, Regional Director of Airport Operations, his silver tie slightly crooked from obvious stress. He scanned the terminal quickly before speaking into an earpiece. "Where is Mr. Bennett now?" "2 minutes out," someone answered. He requested minimal attention. Richard nodded once, then noticed Vanessa standing near Claire. "Cole," he barked quietly, motioning her over. Vanessa hurried toward him immediately. "Sir, I need every department manager on perfect behavior today," Richard warned. "The investor arriving this afternoon owns nearly 18% of this airport's operating contracts." Vanessa swallowed hard. "Understood." Richard lowered his voice further. One complaint today could cost careers. The words hit Vanessa like ice. Behind them, Claire quietly reopened her folder and continued reading through transportation accessibility reports, as if none of the chaos around her mattered. A nearby passenger stared at her in confusion. Another whispered, "How is she so calm right now?" Then the terminal doors opened. A cold gust of rain-filled air swept across the marble floor as security personnel stepped aside instantly. The entire airport seemed to pause. Ethan Bennett entered without rushing, dressed in a dark navy overcoat over a charcoal suit, his expression composed and unreadable. Executives immediately straightened around him, but Ethan barely acknowledged anyone. His eyes moved through the crowded terminal once, before stopping completely on Claire, standing quietly near Gate 14. And in that exact moment, Vanessa Cole felt her stomach drop. The marble floor seemed to amplify every footstep as Ethan Bennett walked through Terminal 1 with calm, measured confidence. Security personnel instinctively moved aside while airport executives followed several steps behind him, careful not to speak unless addressed. Travelers near the lounge entrance lowered their phones and straightened in their seats, sensing the weight of the moment without fully understanding it. Claire remained still beside Gate 14, her gray cardigan softly lit beneath the cold terminal lights. For the first time all afternoon, a faint warmth touched her expression. Ethan stopped directly in front of her and gently reached for the tote bag resting against her shoulder. "You should have called me sooner," he said quietly. Claire offered a tired smile. "I did not want to interrupt your meeting." Around them the silence became almost unbearable. Vanessa Cole stared at the scene in disbelief, her perfectly controlled posture beginning to crack beneath rising panic. Richard Holloway immediately stepped forward with a strained smile. "Mr. Bennett, welcome back to Reagan International. We were not informed that Mrs. Bennett had already arrived." The moment the words left his mouth, several nearby employees visibly froze. One of the businessmen who had smirked at Claire earlier slowly lowered his eyes toward the floor. The young influencer holding her phone suddenly stopped recording altogether. Vanessa's face drained of color as realization crashed over her all at once. Claire Bennett, executive owner priority status, wife of Ethan Bennett. The quiet woman she had publicly humiliated for nearly an hour was connected to the very man capable of reshaping careers inside that airport with a single phone call. Ethan finally turned his attention toward Vanessa. His expression never hardened. That somehow made the tension worse. "You are the lounge supervisor?" he asked calmly. Vanessa swallowed. "Yes, sir. My wife informed your staff several times that she had authorized access," Ethan continued. "Why was she removed from the premium area?" Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came. The entire terminal seemed to hold its breath with her. Richard Holloway stepped in nervously. "Mr. Bennett, I assure you this was a misunderstanding and will be corrected immediately." Ethan glanced briefly toward him before looking back at Vanessa. "A misunderstanding usually happens once," he said quietly. "Humiliation repeated several times becomes a choice." Nobody moved. Even the rolling luggage and distant boarding announcements faded beneath the crushing silence surrounding the group. Claire gently touched Ethan's sleeve before the tension could grow sharper. "Ethan," she said softly, "it is all right." But Ethan's eyes remained on Vanessa, not with anger but disappointment, the kind that carried far more weight. Vanessa lowered her gaze completely now, unable to face the woman she had treated like an inconvenience only minutes earlier. Then Claire spoke again, her voice calm enough to quiet the entire terminal. "I only wanted to board my flight, like everyone else," and somehow those simple words hit harder than any accusation could have. No one inside Terminal 1 seemed willing to breathe too loudly anymore. The energy that had filled the airport only minutes earlier had collapsed into complete silence around Claire and Ethan Bennett. Even the large departure board flickering overhead felt strangely distant now, as travelers and employees watched the quiet woman they had dismissed become the center of the entire terminal. Vanessa Cole stood motionless near the Sapphire Sky Lounge entrance, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as if holding herself together by force alone. Richard Holloway quickly stepped forward again, desperation creeping into his carefully polished voice. "Mrs. Bennett, Mr. Bennett, please allow us to escort you both into the executive suite immediately. We can prepare anything you need before your flight." Claire looked toward the lounge entrance for a long moment. Only an hour earlier, that same doorway had been used to humiliate her in front of strangers. Now, employees stood there nervously waiting for permission to open it. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Ethan remained calm beside her, one hand resting lightly in the pocket of his overcoat. "My wife already requested access earlier," he said quietly. "Your staff made it very clear she did not belong there." Richard's face tightened with embarrassment. "That behavior does not reflect our company values." Claire finally spoke, her voice soft enough that people leaned closer to hear. "Actually, I think it reflected them very clearly." The words landed across the terminal like a sudden drop in temperature. Vanessa visibly flinched. Nearby passengers who had mocked Claire earlier now avoided eye contact completely. The young influencer slowly lowered her phone and deleted the video she had recorded. Claire turned toward the massive windows overlooking the rain-soaked runway before continuing. "I travel almost every week for our foundation," she said. "I meet exhausted parents trying to comfort children during delays. I meet veterans flying home alone. I meet people saving for months just to visit family across the country." Her eyes slowly returned to Vanessa. "Most of them are treated according to their clothes, before anyone hears their name." Nobody interrupted her. The silence had become absolute now. Claire took a slow breath. "Today you embarrassed me because you thought I had no power. If Ethan never walked through those doors, nothing about your behavior would have changed." Vanessa's eyes filled with shame as the truth settled over the crowd. Richard immediately turned toward her with visible frustration, but Ethan raised a hand slightly, stopping him before he could speak. "This is bigger than one employee," Ethan said calmly. "The problem is a culture that confuses wealth with worth." The words echoed through the terminal, stronger than any raised voice could have. Outside, lightning flashed faintly beyond the glass, while airport workers continued guiding planes through the storm. Inside, an entire room full of strangers stood face to face with a truth they could no longer ignore. The storm outside continued pouring across the runway, but inside Terminal 1, the atmosphere had shifted into something far heavier than weather. Employees who had once moved confidently through the airport now stood tense and uncertain beneath the bright overhead lights. Nobody seemed to know where to look anymore. Some stared at the polished floor. Others avoided Claire Bennett entirely, ashamed of how quickly they had judged her. Richard Holloway loosened his tie slightly before forcing another professional smile. "Mrs. Bennett, on behalf of Reagan International, I sincerely apologize for what happened today." Claire studied him quietly for a moment. She had heard polished apologies before. Years of charity work and public outreach had taught her that institutions often became kind, only after consequences arrived. "I appreciate the apology," she replied softly, "but I am more interested in whether anything changes after today." Richard hesitated. Around him, several department managers exchanged nervous glances. Ethan turned toward the large terminal windows, watching rainwater race across the glass, while airport crews guided another aircraft toward the gate. "Claire has spent the last 4 years funding accessibility improvements for smaller airports," he said calmly. "Most people in this building have benefited from her work without ever knowing her name." A ripple of surprise spread through the nearby employees. Vanessa slowly lifted her eyes toward Claire for the first time since the truth had been revealed. "Accessibility improvements?" she asked quietly before she could stop herself. Claire nodded gently. Families with disabled children were sleeping on terminal floors during long delays because many regional airports lacked proper assistance programs. Her voice remained calm, but every word carried weight now. "We created emergency travel grants, mobility support stations, and overnight accommodations." Vanessa's expression tightened with shame. Earlier that afternoon, she had dismissed Claire as someone unworthy of sitting inside a lounge. Now she was learning that the same woman had spent years helping complete strangers travel with dignity. The contrast crushed whatever confidence Vanessa still had left. Ethan looked toward the cluster of executives surrounding them. "Do you know why Claire dresses simply?" he asked. Nobody answered, "Because she believes respect should exist before status enters the room." Silence followed immediately. Even the distant boarding announcements seemed quieter now. Claire noticed the young influencer standing several feet away, holding her phone against her chest. Tears shimmered faintly in the girl's eyes. "I uploaded the video," she admitted softly. "I thought you were pretending to belong here." Claire offered her a small, tired smile instead of anger. "Most people only see what confirms their assumptions," she said. "That is how public humiliation becomes entertainment." The young woman quickly deleted the clip in front of everyone without another word. Vanessa swallowed hard before finally stepping forward. Her polished voice had disappeared completely now. "Mrs. Bennett," she whispered, "I treated you unfairly." Claire looked at her calmly. Then she answered with a gentleness that somehow made the moment even more painful. "You treated me the way you thought powerless people deserve to be treated." For several long seconds, nobody inside Terminal 1 spoke after Claire's words settled across the crowd. The airport that had once felt loud and hurried now stood wrapped in a heavy silence, broken only by distant thunder and the soft echo of rolling luggage far down the concourse. Vanessa Cole looked completely different from the poised supervisor who had stood proudly at the lounge entrance earlier that afternoon. Her shoulders had lowered. The sharp confidence in her expression was gone. In its place remained only the painful realization that she had exposed something ugly about herself in front of an entire terminal full of strangers. Richard Holloway cleared his throat carefully before stepping closer to Ethan and Claire. "Mr. Bennett," he began cautiously, "we would like the opportunity to address this situation properly. I can personally assure you that disciplinary action will be taken immediately." Ethan glanced toward Claire before answering. "Fear of punishment changes behavior temporarily," he said calmly. "Understanding why this happened changes culture." The executives around him fell silent again. Claire slowly gathered the papers from her accessibility folder and placed them neatly inside her tote bag. Her movements remained calm and deliberate, as if she refused to let humiliation change the dignity she carried into the airport hours earlier. "Do you know what hurts the most?" she asked softly. Vanessa looked up uncertainly. Claire continued before anyone could answer. It was not being denied access to the lounge. It was watching how quickly complete strangers decided I deserved embarrassment. Nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. Several people who had watched silently during the confrontation now looked visibly ashamed. One older man removed his glasses and stared down at the floor. A young mother holding her son closer against her shoulder whispered quietly, "She is right." Claire looked toward the giant windows overlooking the rain-covered runway again. "People think cruelty only counts when someone raises their voice," she said, "but sometimes it is quieter than that. Sometimes it is the look that says, 'You do not belong,' the smile that disappears when you walk closer, the assumption that dignity must be earned through wealth." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears she could no longer hide. "I am sorry," she whispered again. This time the apology sounded real. Claire studied her silently for a moment before giving a slow nod. "Then learn from it," she replied gently, "because the next person you judge might not have someone powerful standing behind them." The words hit the terminal harder than any public confrontation ever could have. Ethan noticed several employees lowering their heads immediately after hearing them. Even Richard Holloway seemed shaken now. A boarding announcement suddenly echoed through the terminal for Flight 281 to Chicago. Claire glanced toward the gate number displayed above the crowd. Her flight was beginning to board. Ethan reached for her hand quietly, but before they turned away, Claire looked once more at the airport employees surrounding her. "Every traveler who walks through these doors is carrying a story you cannot see," she said softly. "That should be enough reason to treat them with kindness." The boarding line for Flight 281 slowly formed beneath the bright gate lights, as rain continued sliding down the enormous airport windows outside. Travelers moved quietly now, their earlier confidence replaced with reflective silence, after witnessing everything that had unfolded inside Terminal 1. Claire Bennett stood beside Ethan near the boarding lane, her gray cardigan still simple, her tote bag still worn yet somehow. The entire airport now seemed to see her differently, not because of wealth, not because of power, but because dignity had revealed itself in the calmest possible form. Richard Holloway personally approached the gate scanner, before speaking softly to the boarding attendants. Within seconds, first-class passengers were moved aside while the airline staff prepared a private escort for Claire and Ethan. Claire noticed immediately. "Please do not do that," she said gently. The attendants froze. Richard looked confused. "Mrs. Bennett, we only want to make this right." Claire gave a small shake of her head. Making it right would mean treating everyone with respect, before knowing who they are. Another heavy silence settled over the gate area. Even Ethan smiled faintly beside her, pride visible in his eyes. A nearby flight attendant quietly stepped forward. She looked young, nervous, and deeply affected by everything she had witnessed. "Mrs. Bennett," she said softly, "my little brother uses one of the mobility programs your foundation helped fund in Kansas City." Claire blinked in surprise. The young attendant's voice trembled slightly. "Our family could not afford the travel equipment he needed after surgery. Your program covered everything." Emotion flickered briefly across Claire's face before she reached forward and gently squeezed the attendant's hand. "I'm very glad he is doing better," she replied. The young woman nodded quickly, fighting tears. Around them, several passengers watched in complete silence. The same terminal that had mocked Claire hours earlier now stood witness to the quiet impact of a woman they had mistaken for ordinary. Vanessa Cole remained near the lounge entrance across the terminal, unable to fully leave the scene. She watched Claire speaking kindly to the staff, despite everything that had happened. That hurt more than anger ever could have. Richard Holloway approached Vanessa slowly once the boarding process began. "Human Resources will contact you tomorrow," he said carefully. Vanessa nodded without arguing. For the first time in years, she understood that the real consequence was not losing status or position. It was realizing how easily she had stripped another person of dignity, simply because she believed they lacked importance. As Claire and Ethan finally walked toward the jet bridge together, the terminal remained unusually quiet behind them. No applause followed, no dramatic celebration came, only reflection. Because somewhere between the marble floors, the luxury lounge, and the storm outside, an entire airport had been forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The most dangerous thing about arrogance is not cruelty. It is the blindness that comes with believing some people matter more than others. And that day beneath the cold lights of Terminal 1, the world quietly remembered what dignity looks like. Thank you for watching this powerful story of dignity and respect. If you enjoyed this lesson on character, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell to support our channel's growth.